Hey everybody, fresh off my Bassmaster Classic win, man, what a great week it was. A lipless crankbait was a huge deal for me here this week. Pre-spawn time of year, that's when a bait like this Storm Arashi Vibe really catches some big fish. So hop in here with me, we're gonna break down exactly how I did it to win the Bassmaster Classic. Pre-spawn to me, automatically means a hard bait. You know, I'm thinking a crankbait, I'm thinking a jerk bait, I'm thinking a lipless crankbait. Those baits in the pre-spawn time of year, that's just, for me, where I grew up in East Tennessee, that's what we fish a lot of. It seems like those bass that time of year, they really like a hard bait, something that's imitating crawfish as well as a bait fish. A lot of guys in this event were fishing a crankbait, you know, a standard crankbait, a DT4, DT6, you know, flat-sided baits, whatever it may be. A lipless might seem like kind of an odd choice. This isn't a Sam Rayburn, this isn't a Toledo Bend, a Gunnersville, a grass fishery. That's not what this is here. This is primarily rock on the bottom that we're fishing around, but for me, these areas that I'm fishing are really, really flat. So the bottom doesn't have a lot of taper. I may be sitting in 4 or 5 feet of water, throwing up to 2 or 3. So I'm fishing places that are really flat. And a lipless crankbait for me is just more effective in those places where you're fishing and there's not a lot of depth change. I'm able to control that bait extremely well with 17-pound fluorocarbon line is what I was using on it, and just able to control the depth with the speed that I'm fishing the bait as well as my rod position, and I can really almost worm that bait through those areas where those bass were holding. The thing you always hear with a crankbait, especially a lift bait, is that you need bottom contact to trigger a strike. For me, where I was fishing this lipless bait, I was doing the same thing. I was wanting to make bottom contact to where the nose of that bait would hit those rocks, and it would cause the bait occasionally to kind of hang in the bottom, much like you do when you're fishing grass that'll hang on the hooks. And then you pop the bait free, the nose of that bait would dig into those rocks, hit them a little bit, and then I would kind of just ever so slightly pop that rod tip. I wasn't trying to rip the bait up 2 feet and then let it flutter back down. I was trying to just get that bait to come up 3 or 4 inches, and then it would pause back down just a little bit on the fall. That's when a lot of those bites would come, especially a smallmouth. Those places where I was fishing, I'd catch both species. It seemed like the smallmouth always came after I popped that bait off with some rocks and just kind of half turn the reel handle. That's when those big smallmouth would get it. Don't ever think that this is just a largemouth bait. Think about it this way. Think about a dying shad or even a crawfish, which is probably more what I was trying to imitate with the color I was using. That crawfish is down there scooting along the rocks. Something spooks it. He's going to flare up off the bottom and then he's going to kind of coast back down. That's exactly what this bait was doing. Has to be, in my opinion, why those largemouth and smallmouth were both eating that Arashi Vibe this week. For me, in this situation, and why I chose this bait as well, is that it does have a pretty tight wobble. This water temperature that I was fishing was anywhere from as cold as 51 to maybe 53, 54 degrees. So I wanted a bait that had a real tight wobble, a real tight shimmy. Even though this water was off colored, I didn't want a bait that made a whole lot of noise. I know these fish are pressured, and I'm not expecting one of these fish to have come a great distance to come eat my bait. I already know where he lives. I know right where I need to throw it. I just need a bait that looks pretty natural, that swims just exactly how it needs to, like this one does, and has a little bit of flutter on the fall. So when I pause it, it just shimmies a little bit on the way down. That's when some of those bites would come. Okay, so when you hit the water and you're gonna be throwing a lipless crankbait, the first thing that I always do is check the water temperature. And the reason I want to know that is it just gives me a starting point for how fast I expect to fish that bait. Most of my crankbait fishing is done with a 6/8 to 1 gear ratio, some type of a Bass Pro cranking stick, whether that's a 7-foot or 7-foot 6-inch medium heavy. But I'm gonna make a cast out there, and sometimes if I'm trying to fish that bait 4 or 5 feet deep, I'll initially let it sink on the cast, but then it's gonna be a slow to moderate retrieve. If that water's anywhere from, you know, say 50, 52, 53 degrees, it's gonna be just a slow to moderate. Now, if it's more in that upper 40 range, it's gonna be more about fishing the bait with a rod. It's gonna be more that I'm taking slack up with the reel and pumping it with the rod. Now, if that water's up in the 55, 57 degree range, I'm gonna be turning the reel handle pretty steady, occasionally popping it along, not letting it have a lot of pauses. And if it's, you know, 57 plus, it's gonna be chunk it out and bring it back in. So it's all about matching that up to that water temperature and how aggressive you expect those fish to be. One thing that if you watched much about this classic, you saw or heard people talking about how much current there was flowing through this system right now. And it's the Tennessee River, and some folks may think that it always has that kind of current, but it really doesn't. We've had a tremendous amount of rain, and the current was at an all-time level high for me for fishing down there. I had to really adjust a little bit with the way I was fishing in some of the areas and just really get a grip on how those fish were using that current. There were places that I expected to be good that just weren't because they had so much current blowing across them. For me, those areas that produced my fish were areas that had just a little bit of current. It was more ended up being, and I figured this out throughout practice, kind of about a back current. If you look at, an outside bend, that's a traditional place that's going to catch a lot of current all the time. The places I was fishing would be kind of where an outside bend would kick around, and then it would form a real big eddy, and where that eddy would actually come back in and hit back on something. So those kind of back current places where you had still a little bit of flow, a little bit of water movement, but not near as drastic as it was out on the channel in those really, really heavy current places. A bait like this, that's the Arashi Vibe. It comes out of the pack with really premium treble hooks. I mean, those are VMC hooks. You fish that bait a long, hard day, digging into the gravel on those bottoms. Those points are going to get wore down. Even just from catching a bunch of fish, you're going to wear those hooks down a little bit. They're not going to be quite as sharp as they once were. So I'm always going to upgrade those to that VMC hybrid treble. A number 2 short shank is what I use on this. I'll put that on the front and the back as well. And it being a short shank, it pulls it in there tight to the bait where the fish doesn't have the leverage to be able to throw that bait like they can sometimes. If you look at that hook up close, you can see that it kind of turns in, especially out towards the point. And I feel like that actually protects that point a little bit when you're digging into those rocks and stuff. There were times when I knew for sure my hook would have been dull, but come back, checked it, and it was still good to go. And I think it's because of that shape. Also, that turned in shape, that's what helps locks it into those bass's jaws when you hook them. Number 6 through a number 1 is what I carry for the most part. Regular shank as well as short shank, just depending on which size bait you're using and what fits that bait best. Those crawfish colors early in the spring, that's definitely something key. That rusty crawl or the red crawl, one of those ones, man, if you've got some off-colored water and those fish are keyed up on crawfish, those are gonna be the colors that I pick out then. But once you get to where those fish have really transitioned onto bait, for me, a color that I use when that water has a fair amount of color to it, only 1.5 foot visibility maybe. That hot blue shad, that's definitely one that I like. One that you just can't beat day in and day out, especially on a sunny day like this, the chrome and blue. Man, the flash that puts off, chrome and blue is just your all-time go-to in a lipless crankbait of any kind. But then when you've got some fairly clear water you're dealing with, something that's a little bit more see-through, a little bit more translucent can be extremely good. So always having a variety of colors to match any condition and any bait fish type that you're fishing around. There's one. Oh, that's gotta be a big one. Golly. Oh man, that's a big fish right there now. There's no doubt about it. Here it comes, here it comes. Golly, look at the size of that big old giant. Stay on there, baby. Oh, stay on there. Stay on there. She's got that thing sideways in her mouth. Come here, girl. Oh, come here. Yeah. Wow. Dude, that is a huge fish. Man, lipless crankbaits in the pre-spawn time of year, there's not a lot better way to catch a big old monster like that. What a beautiful, thick, healthy fish that is. I love to fish a lipless crankbait. That cold water temperature, it in the low 50s, that's when those big ones like to munch it.